online. I'm just going to give everyone a few more, another minute to join, and then we will get started. All right, sounds good. Looks like the participant number has reached its plateau. My name is Caitlin. I am a genetic counselor by training, so this session is also near and dear to my heart. And we're going to first talk a little bit about the ClinGen Clinical Genomics Career Series, and then we'll talk a little bit about the field of genetic counseling, and then I will introduce our panelists to get started. So the Clinical Genomics Career Series we hold every summer. This year we have 6 sessions, and so today is genetic counselors. Last week we had members of ClinGen talk about what is their work experience in part of the LGBTQIA and genetics professionals in the field of clinical genomics. Next week, at this session moves to Tuesday. So Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we'll have clinical laboratory career opportunities. So a panelist of individuals who work in clinical laboratory. Following week, again on Tuesday, we have a number of clinicians who work in genetics in various areas of specialties, research development and other opportunities. And then the last one on July 23rd is stepping stones. As a reminder, all of the webinars are recorded. We do add them to our ClinGen Career Series playlist, and that is a QR code to the link. As a reminder, this is a webinar, and participants do have the ability to ask questions. Please ask your question in the Q&A box usually at the bottom of the Zoom screen, maybe a little bit more towards the bottom right. If you see a question that you also have, there's ability to upvote, so you can like the question and we will try and get this to our panelists. Also, a huge thank you to the individuals who presented questions upon registering, and we have incorporated those in today. So before we begin, I just have a quick poll as two questions. The first question is just for you to say where you are in your path of being whatever you're looking for. So are you a student? Are you in a graduate? Are you a master's program? So just where you are in your education and your career. And then the second question is just asking for your familiarity with the field of genetic counseling. And great, so we have people coming from all over. So about 35% of individuals are not a student, and then we do have some that are high school students, undergrads. So we have a good mix of people in all different areas, and some people are not familiar with this field at all, to some people are very familiar. So excellent. And so just to kind of talk a little bit more about the field, what is genetic counseling? Genetic counseling is a communication process that aims to help people understand and adapt to the medical, psychological, and familiar implications of genetic contributions to disease. And genetic counselors are specialists who provide personalized information about your genetic health. Genetic counselors have expertise in many different areas. So genetics, they have great interpersonal and psychosocial counseling skills, various experience and expertise in different education and professional development, and they can practice in multiple settings. So the typical path to becoming a genetic counselor, most genetic counselors do obtain a bachelor's degree. Some receive a bachelor's degree in biology, social science, or related fields. Really could be any field, but some GC programs do require a set of core curriculum or some prerequisite courses in order to apply. The next step is a master's degree in genetic counseling from an accredited program. As of May 2024, there were 60 accredited programs here in the United States and in Canada. After you graduate with your master's, most individuals go on and take the ABCG or the CAGC certification, which is the different certification exams in the US or in Canada. And so this is a board examination. And some states also require license to practice. 34 states are currently issuing licenses. There are 35 states with licenses proposed. One just hasn't started yet. And again, this is as of May 2024. So if you are listening to this recording in a few months, that number has definitely changed. A range of career possibilities. So genetic counselors can work in multiple different settings. Some work in cardiology, some work in pediatrics, some work in prenatal, preconception. There are many different areas of specialty, and the new area that some genetic counselors are pursuing and working in is primary care, which is super exciting. And then you can also work in a variety of centers, different settings. So some genetic counselors work in a hospital, some work for a nonprofit or government organization, some work in laboratories, some work in a medical research institution, some just do research. So there are many options for everybody as we move along. So this is from the National Society of Genetic Counseling. They do a professional status survey. I think they now have done it every year. It used to be every other year. And so coming from the data from the survey that was published in May, this asked genetic counselors questions regarding their work from the year of 2023. So 50% of genetic counselors provided direct patient care, 25% provided non-direct patient care, and then about 23% provided a mixture. And then a little bit more data, employment of genetic counselors is projected to grow by 100% in the next 10 years. And by 2023 is a typo, by 2030, we're likely to have 10,000 certified genetic counselors. Again, based on the professional status survey, the average salary for a full-time genetic counselor in 2023 was a little over $100,000, and that can range up to 250, depending on other areas and specialties, and depending on specialty area experience and maybe some additional degrees. 90% of new graduates responded that they had accepted a position by the end of 2022. So these are GCs that graduated in the spring of 2023. They were employed by the end of 2023. And then 80% of genetic counselors report they are satisfied with their job. And here are some additional resources. And here is our panelists for today. And they are each going to go around and kind of take a moment to introduce themselves. I'm going to ask them, sorry, I didn't mean to jump screen so quickly. I'm going to ask the panelists to kind of tell me a little bit about how'd you hear about your career, and then what are you currently working on, and maybe what you have worked on in the past. So a little bit of your career path and your trajectory. So I'm going to start with Hannah, and then we'll move around.
Hi, everyone. I am Hannah. I am a genetic counselor working at Geisinger. And if you are unfamiliar, Geisinger is a healthcare system that serves primarily central, south central, and northeastern Pennsylvania. And there are lots of genetic counselors working at Geisinger in a variety of different roles. But for me personally, I have a split role, which essentially means that I wear a couple of different hats. So for about 50% of my time, I wear the hat of a clinical genetic counselor, providing genetic counseling services to patients in the cancer genetics clinic. And then with the remaining half of my time, I am working on genomics related research initiatives. And Caitlin, would you like us to talk a little bit about how we found the field as well?
Yes, okay. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I actually grew up alongside a brother who has a pretty significant disability. And so it was from a pretty young age that I was kind of faced with this realization that we are not all viewed nor treated the same through the eyes of the American healthcare system. And that was a realization that really kind of rocked me to my core. And it motivated me to join the healthcare field in some capacity to try to, challenge the status quo a bit. So I dabbled for a number of years throughout undergrad and then 3 years post undergrad in a variety of healthcare fields, and had kind of resigned myself by about 3 years post undergrad to being one of those people who never finds the career that is their dream job. And that was until I was supporting somebody with tuberous sclerosis in one role that I had. And while I was researching his condition, I came across the term genetic counselor, which I had never heard before. And in looking it up, I realized that it was just the most perfect intersection of science and psychosocial science and healthcare that I had been looking for. And so really, after that, the rest is history.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And now I'm going to move over to Kat.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kat Lafferty. I'm a genetic counselor, but my official title currently is Senior Clinical Genomic Variant Analyst. Mouthful, I know. But I work at Broad Clinical Labs at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. And at Broad Clinical Labs, we do a whole lot of sequencing, particularly whole genome sequencing. And I am part of the team that takes that genomic sequencing data and starts to put it in the context of the patients or individuals on the other side of that sequencer that provided the sample, and trying to see if we can find a potential answer to the indication for that testing, what sort of symptoms or features they have, and comb through all that genomic data to try to see if we can find variants that we think might give us some more information as to kind of the how and why these things are happening. So I spent a lot of time looking at a lot of data during these days, but that wasn't always the case. Sort of my whole career trajectory, I've done a little bit of everything in terms of the spectrum of genetic counselors. I started off working in a laboratory, but in a mixed role where I was able to work in a laboratory, but also see patients once a week. I then transitioned into a direct patient role in an oncology clinic, talking to individuals who had personal or family history of cancer, and did that for many years, and then kind of came back to this space working in the sort of laboratory technology side of things. I'm not patient facing currently, again, spending a little bit more time behind the scenes, but I do really enjoy having that perspective behind the scenes, still knowing that what I'm doing is impacting patients, and just even though I'm not one step removed, I'm still being able to be that advocate in the laboratory. In terms of how I discovered this field, interestingly to Hannah, I actually had a pretty similar story. I have a sister with severe intellectual disability and developmental delays, and that's actually how I first heard about it. My parents went to a genetic counselor when I was about 16, when my sister and I were first born. Genetic counseling didn't really integrate into the medical field the way it does now, but about the time we were 16, it sort of picked up. My mom came back from that appointment and she's like, I found the career for you. This is amazing. And of course, me being a 16-year-old, I was like, yeah, mom, whatever. I got soccer practice. And lo and behold, she was right all those years later. It really, again, echoing what Hannah said, a perfect marriage of always being fascinated with the science. And I think some of that stemmed from my sister just wanting to understand how our bodies work, how the brain works, and trying to kind of figure those things out, but then also being able to be that advocate and talk to people, which I also loved and enjoyed. So that kind of took me down that road. Eventually, she was right.
So moms always know, even before we do. So I will move on to Saskia.
Hello, I'm Saskia Vandenberg. I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada, and I actually went to the Canadian program there before moving to the States. I also previously worked at a genetic testing laboratory, and I wore a few different hats there. So I was what's considered the lab genetic counselor, so kind of more liaising with like physicians and people ordering the testing as opposed to patients directly, although sometimes they, of course, call us, and doing more kind of behind the scenes work. I saw patients. I also worked more in the with the sales team was called a medical science liaison, so kind of presenting and explaining testing to physicians. Currently, I'm at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York, seeing reproductive or prenatal patients, so people who are currently pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, to talk about genetic testing and their genetic testing options. I came across genetic counseling while I was an undergrad. I also wanted to do something in the healthcare field, was always interested in biology, and kind of explored a little bit of what possible career paths came out of that. And genetic counseling was definitely one that interested me. And I was lucky enough to do a fourth year kind of director of studies project where I cold emailed a bunch of PIs and people at the university, and one of the people who responded was someone who was actually a medical geneticist, so a doctor seeing patients clinically and who also did research. And so he graciously took me under his wing, and I did a project with him in the research side, but was able to shadow and spend time with him in the clinic. So that kind of really solidified kind of the career path for me.
Excellent. Thank you. And Julianne?
Sure. We're like all of us, and I think that'll be the flavor of genetic counseling. Wear a couple different hats. I actually do work in clinical care, predominantly in hereditary cancer, and I was in a hereditary GI clinic this morning, which is my love. I also do quite a bit of research, both using some social science research, kind of stakeholder engagement, as well as other qualitative research, and do variant science, or I have in the past. I unfortunately don't have as much time for it, but I definitely put it to use, and do a lot of health services research, kind of looking at equity of care and practice models. I'd say my career has had some interesting changes, and I know there's some questions about changing between different things. So I started out in pediatrics. I then kind of have rolled into some educational program development, and kind of across a broad spectrum, as well as kind of academic administration of all things genetic, and then got more into some social science research. Spent a couple of years over in industry and some research and development, actually at Illumina, where we were developing what was then the first clinical whole genome, which got me a lot into variant science, because that was back in 2010, before we had rules and regulations or large population databases. And so as I did more and more variant science and contributed to kind of helping to create some of those rules with some really, really amazingly smart people, got really interested back in academic research. And so then left industry, came back to academic research. And while I'm in an academic medical center, of course, they said, of course, you're going to start seeing our patients. So I ended up doing some research, and then fell back in love now with cancer, which from where I started my career 25 years ago, the field of cancer is a perfect meld now of a lot of the growing technologies and variant science, especially now looking at both germline, so the genetics that someone's born with, as well as the genetics of their tumor and how those can impact treatment as well. So that's kind of how I ended up to where I am now. How I discovered the field. Well, this is where I may be one of the older people on this call. So when I was investigating the field 27-ish years ago, you can go back and look at what types of internet browsers we used. There really was not a good way to figure out about it. Luckily, I had an undergraduate course with a professor who knew about genetic counseling. And he's actually responsible for a lot of genetic counselors in similar generations. And so I called him on the telephone, because that's how you interacted with people, and said, I remember there was this career thing. I kind of thought I wanted medicine, but now I'm thinking maybe I don't want to do medicine. There was something you said, and it seemed really interesting because it was all about the science, but interacting with people. And how can I find more? So then he mailed me a packet in the actual physical mail with printouts about different programs. And I actually wrote off to programs to figure out how to apply. And so I discovered the field my junior year of college, and kind of really stumbled into it. It was a very different set of, competition for getting in, different expectations. I'm not really sure I knew what I was getting into, but I'm so glad I found genetic counseling here, several decades later. So I would not have the same, or you would not have the same experience I did in terms of finding out information.
Now, many schools hold open houses, so you can learn a little bit more about their program and how they apply and how to apply. So hopefully that is a bit more streamlined, but I love the story and I love all the work that you did to find the program. And then Austin.
Yes. Okay. So I'm Austin Tracy. I currently work at the Children's Hospital of Michigan, as well as some other sites that are part of the larger Detroit Medical Center campus. I work primarily in pediatric genetics. However, I do see adult patients, newborns, really anybody across their lifespan. The way I see it is I see any sort of patient that would not obviously be better served by a cancer genetic counselor or a reproductive genetic counselor. Specifically at this point, I'm working a lot with cystic fibrosis newborn screening, X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy newborn screening, but really seeing things across the spectrum, a lot of rare disease. Previous to this role, I worked actually both with Caitlin and Sastia at Semaphore Laboratories. Sastia was one of my clinical supervisors, I guess laboratory supervisors. So it's still a small world in genetic counseling. And in that role, I was providing remote patient care. So I was doing a lot of telephone conversations about reproductive genetic test results, primarily expanded carrier screening, with a little bit of this and that thrown in there for good measure. I went to school where Saskia is currently working at Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I graduated in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, which was a lot of fun, as you might imagine. And the way I found out about genetic counseling is in middle school, I took a career aptitude test. And apparently, it was a sufficiently advanced career aptitude test that genetic counseling was a recognized profession and one that it matched me up with. The other options were bioethicist and lawyer, which I think kind of made sense. It seems like a good triangulation of sort of skills and responsibilities among those three professions. But I had it in the back of my mind throughout the beginning of my college career. I also sort of struggled with that. Do I or do I not want to join medicine that I think Julianne was discussing? Decided, no, I don't want to do medicine. I'd rather do genetic counseling, and applied, got in, did the school thing, and here I am.
Fantastic. So we have one question that we received in the chat, which is how did you choose your specific GC field, prenatal cancer, neuro? Did you go into grad school with an idea of what you wanted to focus on, or see what you were connected with, how you did a clinical rotations? It also sounds like from hearing from everyone, we kind of have moved around a little bit. And so maybe I'm going to reframe this a question and say, like, what kind of advice would you give a student in terms of going into grad school in order to help decide what area you want to specialize? What are some of the things that you took into consideration? What are the things that you found helpful in order to kind of move your career trajectory into the avenue that you have went? So I'm going to start with Hannah, and then if anybody has something similar, you don't feel pressure to answer, but I will try and get a little bit of advice from you all.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is a common experience or not, but I know that my fellow classmates throughout my training all entered grad school with a specific specialty that they knew they wanted to go into, that they were in love with, and they could just envision themselves working within that specialty the rest of their lives. For me personally, I had absolutely no clue. I didn't feel like I was overwhelmingly drawn to any one specialty, nor were there any specialties that I felt repelled by either. So I think it was almost fortuitous that I went into my training program with that mindset, because I really had my mind open to being blown away by any specialty. And it was kind of funny because with every new clinical rotation. And as some of you on the call may know, genetic counselors are cross-trained across numerous specialties. And many programs require that you complete a rotation in each one of the core specialties of genetic counseling. And for me, with each new specialty in which I rotated, I determined that was my favorite specialty. That's what I'm going into. Got it. Okay, I have it all figured out. But then I would enter my next one and, soon just become more and more confused. And so, honestly, I think I am just a person who would be content in any specialty, even still to this day. Currently, I am working within the cancer space. And what I love about working in cancer is that I feel like it's a specialty in which you can kind of develop a bit of a flow and a mojo, and you don't necessarily have your head constantly on a swivel like you might be feeling like in peds, Austin, for example, sometimes, and even in prenatal when, you know, some crazy ultrasound finding comes up that you weren't expecting and you have 5 seconds to get it together to be able to counsel a patient on it. Cancer is not so much that way. Of course, we get the the odd curveball every now and then. And of course, we need to adapt our counseling to every single patient that sits in front of us. But it is a specialty in which you can kind of develop a bit of an expertise. And I like having the routine of that because I feel like it opens up the floor for having more time to really sit with a patient in the journey that they are going through. So rather that be their own personal cancer battle, or perhaps they have a family that has been deeply affected by cancer, I have the time in this specialty to really provide a lot of psychosocial support and counseling that I don't feel like is always there in every specialty. So if I were to have to give advice for a prospective student about how to approach which specialty they'd like to go into, I would say just try to have an open mind. It has served me well.
May I add? So I also just want to recognize the fact that in so many ways, even though we might think of genetic counselors as working in specific specialties, there's so much overlap. I would not in any world consider myself a cancer GC. I've never worked in that specific specialty outside of school. But we get cancer findings in prenatal, or not prenatal, what am I talking about? In pediatric clinic all the time, and in adult clinic, certainly. Some of the conditions that we follow, in so many ways, are hereditary cancer predispositions, even if they might not be thought of that in the same way that like someone with a BRCA1 or 2 variant would be considered to have a hereditary cancer predisposition. And genetics in so many ways is about the family structure too. So we definitely have to tackle, and even our center, with issues related to reproductive genetic testing options. It really all connects to each other at the end of the day. I myself also did not really have a specific agenda for what specialty I was. Same experience as Hannah. I think a lot of people in my class specifically were quite open to learning what specialty that they liked, and I think everyone that had that mindset was well served for it. So I think if you don't have a clear idea, that might actually be a good thing.
I'll add as well. I will also echo my sort of main advice is always sort of have an open mind. But I think too also to be open to throw yourself into experiences and be okay learning that you don't like a certain specialty or area. And I think that's also really true when considering just genetic counseling as a field in general. As much opportunity as you have to expose yourself to a certain situation, experience, work life, sometimes it can be just as helpful to find the things that you don't like as the things that you do like. And so having an open mind to let yourself experience both of those equally and help that kind of navigate you throughout your career. And I know for me, as I was picking sort of the differential of what I wanted to do with my life, having, everything on paper sounded wonderful, but actually getting into them and figuring out what was a good fit, sort of helped me narrow into my path. And then once you graduate as a genetic counselor, I would also echo that open mindset. Just for example, I went into school thinking I wanted to do pediatrics, and that was the only thing I wanted to do. Quickly learned in grad school that was not a good fit for me. Graduated saying I want to do anything but cancer. Ended up working in a cancer clinic for 7.5 years and absolutely loving it. So again, just the open mind and just being open to the whole spectrum of experiences, and don't be frustrated by finding a thing that's not a good fit for you. There's a reason why, and finding what is the right fit is going to be that much better when you have that mixed experience, those mixed experiences.
And I just want to also add on to all of these things that how being a cancer counselor is not a one size kind of fit all bucket, similar to what Austin was saying. Same with peds, the way that or how you interact with patients, how you interact with your colleagues, team visits with other MD, either geneticists or other specialists, it's going to be different depending on that clinic or that institution. And so even when you do your rotations, I'm sure, like for me, every peds rotation I did was incredibly different. So going, when I was considering a job, one of the things I looked for is I needed flexibility because I had a partner. And so I was looking for a job based on a location. And that's totally okay as well. I knew that my counseling program had prepared me to have a good foundation to jump off in any specialty. And so that's what I worked from. And then in my genetic counseling, the reason why I made changes was because of when you do your job, and you've probably experienced this, when you're learning something and you find that there's some aspect about your job that you're willing to spend extra time on that you really enjoy. When you're like, oh, that was just fascinating, I loved that aspect of it, then allow yourself to follow those threads. And that's what I've done. And so there are threads that I've followed. It's not just that I've been, oh, I'm tired of this job today, let me see what's out there. No, there's been a reason. And I'd say every single position that I have is one that was created actually for me because I was following threads and was making connections. And so I've never held a position that existed prior to me being in it. And so I think that genetic counseling just as a field is incredibly flexible, and it allows you also to develop passions and to be able to follow those and to continue to grow, which is to me what's really exciting.
I will add a comment since we all have. I definitely agree that going to the program, I think staying open-minded, you do get training on definitely the main three kind of core areas. And depending on what school you go to and availability, there can be more specialty clinics. So you go into the workforce fully trained. And as you can hear from all of us here, there's definitely split roles. So some people see cancer and prenatal. There's definitely, depending on where you are, very specific people who just focus on one disease category to people who see kind of the broad range of spectrum. And so it can, really be a very different experience, even within cancer, if you're doing pediatric cancer versus adult cancer, or down to a very one sector of that. So I think the experience can be very broad. And so definitely, even if you say, I definitely want to do cancer, there's such a wide variety between that experience and roles. And definitely, as we've move through the years, there's definitely become very specialized positions. And so definitely would encourage not even being hung up on kind of one thing, but as Julianne pointed out, pulling out what thread you maybe particularly enjoy, a patient population, a maybe group of disorders, and kind of what is that you enjoy particularly.
And I know that we have a question in the chat of what does research as the GC look like? And I think just going off of that, everyone has said here, it's what you want it to look like. So some people have done research in a specific disease or a specific condition, and they want to be a variant scientist. So they are working on reviewing the literature and have a classification. I'm a genetic counselor here, and my main role is at a research institution working on ClinGen grant. So I run a patient registry. Other people work for advocacy organizations. Julianne talked about a little bit social science research that she has done. So I think as we have highlighted in this, it's what you want it to look like. What kind of research would you like to do, and getting involved and going forward through there. Another question we received is, how do grad schools value GPAs and grades compared to clinical experience like internships and shadowing? And so I'm a bit far removed from when I applied to school. And so I think from my understandings, a lot of schools are looking for all of those. They're looking for you as a person. What is your academics? What is your passions? What have you pursued outside in terms of shadowing or internships? And so I'm just going to ask, I know some of us all work with students, or maybe we have helped individuals apply. So what would a successful applicant look like for you guys? What are some of the features that you guys are looking for with your students that are rotating, or when you are reviewing application?
And I was going to jump in. We work very closely with our one of the graduate programs here in North Carolina, the UNCG program, but we also run an intern program at UNC for individuals who are applying. And so we're always trying to figure out what is the shifting needle in terms of qualifications. And one of the things I will throw out there is that programs absolutely want to recognize the whole person, but they also get so much competition. You don't want to make it easy for them to bluntly cut you out of consideration because of either a lack of clinical exposure or a lower GPA. Now, you can't undo a GPA that you've had in the past. So how do you fix that? Take some additional graduate level courses, show that you can succeed taking a graduate ethics course or a biostatistics course or something that would be applicable. And you can even ask some of the programs and look, or ask other genetic counselors, what do they think might be a good topic? Because if you have a bad GPA, you're trying to figure out, well, can I still do genetic counseling? Yes, but you may have to show that you can do that level of work. And clinical experiences, crisis counseling, those are things you absolutely need to have some exposure, but there's so many different ways to be able to do it. You do not have to be sitting side by side with a genetic counselor at shadowing in clinic. There's lots of other ways to get clinical exposure. And so you can be creative. You can work in any other clinic. You can work as a medical assistant. So there's lots of ways just to show that you feel comfortable interacting with patients.
Yeah, I'm going to tepidly add in on this one. I think Julianne makes a good point that to whatever extent it is possible, of course, you want not to give the programs a concrete reason to devalue your application and remove you from consideration. I wish that there were an easier answer than that. But I do think tapping into that point Julianne made about understanding the applicant from a holistic perspective, I do want to just recognize that I think a lot of programs are starting to, in some way, try to measure the ways in which an applicant has succeeded in the face of adversity. So even just contextualizing your application in such a way where maybe your less than ideal GPA can be attributed to some sort of external circumstance, and you have shown the wherewithal in one way or another to overcome that barrier. I think that that could serve your application well. And I think, frankly, uniqueness is a benefit. I know that there have been questions about this in the past, but we do have a little bit of a diversity problem in genetic counseling. And I think that if you are able to evidence in some way that the experience that you bring to the table, maybe your patient advocacy experience, your crisis counseling experience, a robust research background, some sort of lived experience that you have sets you apart from other applicants, I think that there is probably a way to sort of sell that unique experience in a way that can, in some way at least, counter some of these more concrete things like GPA.
I think the one thing I would add is that definitely many programs, at least when I was applying, had certain criteria of courses and then crisis experience. And I'd probably say in this day and age, learning more about genetic counseling or expressing that you understand, what genetic counseling is in some way through shadowing or, speaking to one and things like that is important. But I think also encourage you to not think about it as just like a box, right? Like this is the role you will be talking to patients. And so it's not just about like saying, well, I did the 6 months that you said, but do you show that over longer periods of time? Are you getting involved with maybe patient advocacy groups? Are you expressing interest in kind of the field of genetics in different ways? Because, we want you to see that, you're excited, that you're interested in the field. And, I would say, just kind of checking the boxes, definitely like gets you in and gets you into the application. But, and as kind of was mentioned, it's pretty competitive. So I think seeing the enthusiasm and the ways that you're exploring the field is also really exciting to see for applicants and can set you apart, again, as Austin mentioned, with the different experiences you might be showing.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. There is no set prescription that you can follow that is going to make you the most ideal genetic counseling applicant. Um, and of course, yes, there are boxes that you have to check. There are prerequisites that you have to complete and achieve a certain grade. But in many ways, I think that the better question to be asking yourself is not what do schools want to see from me or what do they like to see, but rather what is it that sets my soul on fire? Why am I passionate? What am I passionate about? And how can I leverage those passions into an internship or volunteer experience or work experience in a way that is directly relevant to genetic counseling? Because that will show through when it comes interview time that you are not just checking the boxes, but you are doing things that really matter to you as a person and as an individual, as well as a future professional.
Yeah. And I will echo everything that everyone has said here. And again, just going off of that passion, also don't be shy in getting creative with how you think about that passion and how you have shown and demonstrated that throughout your life and your experiences. I think, many of us could say similar things about why genetic counseling is something we're passionate about, but we could probably say very different things about other fires that we might have that light our passion. So again, find the things that are unique. Don't be shy of something that may seem sort of non-traditional, but that really makes you stand out and is going to show and demonstrate the skills that you have that will make you a successful genetic counselor. Because ultimately, sure, there is a competitive level to that, but genetic counseling programs are trying to assess who is going to be successful in this program, but also in our profession and in our field. And if you can demonstrate what you can bring and how you can thrive, that's going to be really helpful and important.
Thank you. That is all amazing advice. Someone asked a little bit about how the teams work together in terms of the bio scientists and then the individuals, maybe the physicians or the genetic counselors. And I would say that everyone has to work together. Everyone needs to share all of this information in order to provide the best patient care. Coming from my days in the lab, and I'll let everyone else answer, we would have our genetic counselors often go back to questions with the variant scientists, ask for more clarification, ask for their understanding, or maybe something in the family history is a little bit more suspicious for a VUS, and say, hey, can you relook at the data? Here's some additional participant or family information that we have received. And so I think from my point of view is everyone has to work together. Everyone needs to kind of explain each of their processes in order to help get the best patient care and deliver the information. And I know that some of you are more closely tied to the variant scientist role and then also as the GC role. So not sure if you have any other insight to add.
I guess I'll add. Have I ever professionally worked specifically in variant curation? No. So someone who has on the panel might be able to provide sort of a more specific answer, but I definitely was the genetic counselor Caitlin was talking about, bothering the variant curation team at Semaphore all the time about what genotype phenotype correlation information do we have on X, Y, and Z variant. We have some sort of situation where that information would be helpful. And I think just sort of like through osmosis, I've taken some of that into my present career, and it's been quite helpful just in terms of knowing sort of what to look for in specific variants, how to apply variant classification criteria, knowing how laboratories might report things, like what sort of like dog whistles, special language might they use. I think all of that is quite helpful just to have that sort of immersion in that environment to translate those insights into a clinical setting. I think communication ultimately is the key. You, as a genetic counselor, will be well skilled in communicating with others. So I think you kind of actually end up just applying your counseling skill set to acquiring that information from laboratories and then using the traditional genetic counseling models to relay that to patients. I hope that answered your question.
And I can speak a little bit, of course, also from a variant scientist side of things, but I think just generally, you know, the sort of central pillar of genetic counseling is informing patients and making sure that patients sort of understand what is going on and being a resource to help make them informed and empowered. And so that whole process of informing them is also setting up expectations. So somebody in the clinic needs to set up expectations for what testing, as was mentioned, what might be reported, what might be reported. So my role on the laboratory side of it is to be clearly communicating with any individuals who might be ordering from us and what is our reporting process and procedure. Even simple things like what is our turnaround time. All of those are expectations that patients want to sort of engage with and talk about in that initial potentially pretest counseling and have that information. So it's critical that we're being able to set up those expectations. And then once we sort of take that information from the report, we're trying to put that back into a way that can be understood by both the patients and providers alike. And so absolutely being a resource for that. It's impossible to be a one-way street. It has to be a lot of conversations back and forth, and certainly been able to work together on both sides of it. I feel lucky I've been able to live on both sides of that, and I think it gives me a very strong perspective in the role I sit now. I've been in the lab side, I've been in the clinic side, and so I can really see both of those and anticipate some of the needs of maybe a GC in the clinic. But I work together with laboratories, and we've been able to help deepen the answers and information we can get to patients by working together, whether it's family studies, whether it's following up on research or other sort of things. And that's ultimately our goal is informing patients and helping them get the most helpful information for them and their families. And it's just impossible without communicating and working together.
Yes, thank you all. I'm going to end on one last question in terms of what are some of the challenges you guys experience in your day-to-day, and kind of what of maybe other skills do you feel that you use to help with those challenges, help overcome them, to talk a little bit more about the qualities of a genetic counselor.
You made us all pause. I think when it comes to challenges, because, those can come in all kinds of forms. As a clinician, it could be something that seems quite mundane, but is very important to our patients, which is insurance. And what's the cost that testing is going to be? And that's where, helping them understand, okay, well, why are we recommending this test? What is the potential benefit from this test? And then us going to bat with an insurance company or a policy, which makes no sense with the clinical science, but it's what we got to deal with. And so there's certainly those types of challenges. And you try to figure out what are the ways, who are your phone of friends, what are your avenues within, you know, even that insurance company to be able to try to help that patient get a service you think they need. Or otherwise, is there a workaround completely? How can you make sure they're still going to be screened, even if you can't get that test or you can't get that whatever? And so I think with genetic counseling, you're constantly using your maybe cruise director skills in terms of planning, trying, pivoting, trying again, working with a patient, and that could be even with research. You try something. If it doesn't work, you try to figure out why it didn't work. You see if there's another direction you can try. I would say that skill sets are flexibility. You got to just keep going, trying to understand and getting as much background information and understanding the challenges and what are some of the issues can be really helpful. And calling on your colleagues. The genetics field is really tiny, and then healthcare in general, you're going to be working with so many different individuals, either in the research setting, the clinical setting, or if you work in a clinical lab. So someone else has likely encountered it, and always seeking advice and suggestions.
Yes. Oh, Kat, I see that you also turned your mic on. Do you want to go first?
Go for it. I'll pop in after.
Okay. Yeah, I likewise to Julianne. I feel like I've said this now a few times. Apparently Julianne and I are just on similar wavelengths. Yes, in terms of monetary resources that a patient can expend into the genetic counseling process, I think that that is always a challenge. A lot of insurance policies just do not make sense in trying to kind of exploit the infrastructure in which you work to be able to provide patients with appropriate testing at no or low cost is quite a robust skill set to develop. And I think one that is always a moving target. Different laboratories change their processes regarding patient payment, insurance policies change all the time. So I think, yes, developing a skill set around that is quite helpful. And frankly, I think having experiences with poverty is quite helpful to sort of be able to imagine the situation that the patient is in. Not to get into too much details regarding my personal past, but part of the reason I got into genetic counseling was because I grew up in a poor rural environment and saw firsthand the many ways that interfacing within those systems led to barriers to care, misunderstandings about what medicine can and cannot do, and really just noticing the ways in which those barriers to care, those barriers to access really harmed patients. And I think that if you have some of those experiences, you can leverage that into a shared empathy with the patient, maybe an awareness for what they are actually dealing with, what their priorities really need to be, and taking care of those priorities. We have patients who cannot afford food, who need special metabolic diets, and we work to cook them meals to provide them food in clinic so they can rest assured that they can seek clinical care without sacrificing food for the day. We ensure that patients have housing because if you have a complex chronic disorder, you need to have a house. Like that's just kind of the end all be all at the end of the day for you. So really understanding how someone's hierarchy of needs not being met is affecting their ability to take care of themselves in the way that you're trying to take care of them. I think that that is one of the most invaluable skill sets that genetic counselors have, and also recognizing the ways in which barriers to receiving information and education regarding a condition isn't in of itself potentially a barrier to someone taking care of themselves, following up on medical management recommendations. I think genetic counselors, one of their biggest challenges is ensuring adherence to medical care, but I think we're actually extremely well positioned to do so, and I think that that's a challenge very much worth taking.
And to add off of that, I think we all agree there's access challenges that we all face, and sort of where I sit in a laboratory setting, what is my role in all of that? And really, how can we make the best tests possible that are more accessible to patients. So one of the challenges that we have in the laboratory and doing variant analysis and interpretation is sort of finding that balance between efficiency and comprehensiveness. We want to provide a good product, but it takes a lot of time. You know, we have billions of bases in our genomes, millions of variants within there, and we're trying to take all that data and analyze it in a way that we can return it back to patients in a reasonable amount of time, but that we've also been really thorough and comprehensive. And so I've been really fortunate at, you know, sort of the larger group that I work with at the Broad Institute and many people, you know, even on this call that are involved in a lot of initiatives that are trying to make this whole process better. How to create better resources that are able to make us more efficient in how we analyze genomic data. So that ultimately will impact the patient. How do we make genomic databases more representative of the population? And that will make us better in how we can use filtration tools. And then ultimately, you know, sort of how the whole process of putting these reports together, there's also a big sort of buzz on what could be the potential of utilizing things like AI to help support us in this process. Now, I know AI sort of gets into some people's concerns of that replacing us or sort of the fear of that coming, but I don't think fear is going to get us anywhere with this situation. And I think if anything, we need to embrace this and figure out, you know, how do all of these tools together help us create better testing and better tools? And then where do we leverage the skills that we have as genetic counselors to sort of supplement this process that might be assisted by AI and, again, additional resources. So again, that's a constant thing that my team works on, and how do we, again, sort of find that balance of efficiency that we can ultimately pass on to the patients in making testing better and ultimately more accessible.
Well, thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for their time. I super appreciate it, and for sharing your experience, your careers, your knowledge with everyone. I'm just going to put up the schedule one more time. So just to let everyone know that this is a clinical genomics career series that is hosted by ClinGen, which is the clinical genome resource of NIH. And so all of these webinars are recorded and they will be available on our YouTube playlist. And this is the upcoming schedule for the rest of the summer. And here is also the link to our website, clinicalgenome.org. The front webpage is the Genomics Career Series. There's a link to that. That will also house the link to all of their webinars. And this is our link to our social media. And so I'm sorry if we were unable to get your question. You can send it along and I'll try and answer it over the next few days. So thank you once again to our panelists. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your experience. And thank you to all of our attendees, and I wish you the best of luck as you continue sorting out what are the various career options you have ahead.
Thank you again for having us, Caitlin, and everyone who watched.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.